Welcome to another episode of the Digital Native Podcast. My name is Ryan Anderson, your host. My guest today brings deep experience in the data and analytics space, having worked in leadership positions for companies like Oracle, Microsoft, Sisense, and SAP Business Objects. He's written multiple books on the topic, and he's a writer for Forbes Monthly. I'm excited to have the head of data and analytics for Google Cloud. That's Bruno Aziza. Bruno, thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Ryan. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I'm excited to have you and talk about an area and topic that I'm pretty passionate about myself. Want to talk more about your role at Google and what you're going to be focused on. But before we do that, tell us more about your background and where your passion for data and analytics comes from.
So I'm French. For people that are in your community that don't know me, if they're wondering what the accent is I've moved to the US about 20 years ago. And just like you said in the intro, I moved from France to the Silicon Valley, and I worked for a couple of startups, data analytics startups, as well as worked for Business Objects and Microsoft, and been in the field of data analytics my entire career. So that's about 20, 25 years or so. I've had the opportunity to write 2 books on the topic, and I'm very, very passionate about data analytics. That's really the only thing I've done, and it's the only thing I want to do.
And the space is changing so quickly, and obviously over the past couple decades, You've seen it really evolve. Tell me more about how you ended up at Google, why you took the role, and what you're most excited about.
Wow, that's a loaded question because you're right. First, the industry has changed a lot over the last 3 decades. But the reason for why I came to Google, first of all, it's the people, right? So a lot of the people I work with today are people that I've worked with throughout my entire career. And so, talking through what they were working on, I thought it was really interesting to, you got to work with people that you love working with. And so that's what's going on. That was my first motivation. The second motivation is if you look at the technology and the pace of innovation that Google's been able to put forth, it really is impressive, not just in where they've been, where we've been, but where we're going to be. If you look at where the industry's next chapter is going to be, it's going to be in consuming analytics, consuming artificial intelligence through analytics, just in about any experience. And I think that the best company to provide those types of services to customers is Google. And in fact, now that I've been here a couple of months and I've talked to many, many customers, people who follow me on LinkedIn, they know that every week I have my Customer of the Week award. It's really amazing the amount of innovation that our customers are doing. You've got MLB and the Home Depot, and then you've got HSBC. You've got all these great companies that, you might not expect are innovating so quickly, but then when you double down or drill down into their use case, it's really quite amazing the type of work they've been able to produce. So it's just an exciting time to be in data analytics. I feel like finally we're getting payback time for all these years where nobody really cared about databases and analytics, but now it's back.
No, absolutely. And it's exciting. You look at Google's mission statement, it's taking the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful. And I think that puts us in a very unique place to help our customers do the same thing with their data. So
Absolutely.
Thomas Kurian, CEO, go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to provide context for people that maybe they're new to the industry. This industry is not a young industry. The data analytics industry is a 30-year old industry, but it's tried many ways to get data to individuals. And if you're watching us and you're wondering, are you getting value out of the data that you have? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. If you look at some of the data in the market here, 86% of analysts still struggle because the data they have is out of date. 90% of employees still think that the data that they're getting is unreliable. And 80% of your analysts' work is still very descriptive. So we're still at the very first innings, if I can use the baseball analogy, of this industry. So if you're feeling behind, don't feel bad because a lot has happened before here. There's a lot more that we're going to be able to discover together. And that's what excites me is the potential that we have ahead of us is really quite amazing.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry has been so high historically. And some of the technology that we're bringing to market is making that so much easier for our customers to get that value. And that kind of brings us to your role. Tell us more about your role, what your team's focused on. When I heard about your role and kind of the focus on the customer, that got me excited. But tell us more about your role.
So what I do at Google is I run what's called outbound product management. So outbound product management really focuses on 5 dimensions of the business. The first one is sales, which is about how do we get the best products out to you? Or, how do you consume this experience through our partners and our sales force, of course. But you as an advocate, you might be one of our biggest sales forces, the end users that are getting value out of the data. So I have a team focused on that. Then we focus on product strategy. If you're unfamiliar with the data and analytics portfolio, we've got 11 or 12 services, depending on how you look at it. And so we want to make sure that you understand our strategy across all of them, not just one pillar, but across all 12 services. Analysts is another area of our work, which is how do we bring our analysts into our product strategy? You're talking to analysts on a daily basis, and here I'm referring to Gartner and Forrester and IDC and Ventana, who are doing a great work. We want to make sure that we hear that feedback from them because we have non-customers talking to analysts, and we have our own customers talking to analysts, and maybe telling them what you're not telling us directly. And then, of course, customers, who are really the core of everything that we do. We are building products so you get value out of your data. So it's important that we create moments for you to give us feedback and for you guys to hear from each.
So I've heard you talk about, there's 3 things that you're going to be focused on in this role, and that's customers,
Yes.
customers, which I love.
That's correct.
And I think it's a very similar approach to, our CEO, Thomas Kurian. When he came on board, first thing he did was go talk to all of our customers and ask, why did you move to Google Cloud? And the answer that he heard was the technology. I mean, it's like nothing we've seen.
Yeah.
So let's focus more or take our attention to kind of the market. I think I want to talk about, what are you seeing? What are some of the trends that you're seeing across the data and analytics landscape? And let's start there before we talk specific about Google.
Yeah, and just to continue on this theme of customers, when you're in the product organization, we have to focus on how do we help these customers drive value out of the data that they have. So it is natural that you think leaders like Thomas Kurian and others in the organization are focused on that because we are taking guidance from you. Where do you want to innovate? You've got a lot of experience in your own industry. So we want to make sure that we line up to your strategy. In the end, the way I think about our job is we're actually not in the software business, we're in the career management business. Like we win because you get promoted, right? So that's why we're obsessed about your personal and professional success. Now, when you talk to customers, particularly in the analytics space, there's one trend I'd like to talk about, which is what we call the 3 C's, right? So what's happening and disrupting, if you will, the market. And the 3 C's stand for cloud. Obviously, everyone is including cloud in their plans today, either because they're migrating some workloads to the cloud or they have a multi-cloud strategy they want to elaborate. So that's an important component that's changing the game because it's enabling companies to innovate faster, but it's creating a new tech stack and a new tech environment that they have to scale up for. The second C is the consumerization of analytics. So when you think about where analytics have been so far, they've been really available to the professionals. And by that, I mean, we started with the folks in IT and the power users of data analytics tools. And then we made progress in the self-service era towards the business analysts. But these are still folks whose job it is to work with data and analytics. The next phase is going to be consuming analytics just about everywhere. And so by that, I mean, you pick up your phone as an end user, you are used to starting out the device to tell you things about you that maybe you don't know, which is the nirvana of analytics, is something that tells you something about you that you didn't know before. And then the third C is this idea of convergence. When you think about supporting this highly dynamic, real-time world, consumer-driven world for analytics, you've got to start thinking about the stack convergence. For instance, artificial intelligence and business intelligence coming together, data warehousing and data lakes coming together. And so that is creating both a challenge and an opportunity for organizations because they got to think left and right, both from a tech stack standpoint, but also from the types of audiences they have to construct these analytics solutions for. And it's a challenge, but it's also an amazing opportunity when you get there.
I love that you talk about, just kind of the context and the ability for these companies to tell their customers something about themselves they don't know. For me, I'm thinking about, I just started picking up running. And at the end of my run, I can take a look and say, hey, I ran this distance in 30 minutes. But the information I really want is how do I stack up to, other similar individuals that are my age or my demographic or, in my area. And I think a lot of that is really going to add a ton of value across the space in different industries.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example, right? Because maybe today you have an app that keeps track of your own, activity. I run as well and do CrossFit as well. And the CrossFit gym that I go to, even in these COVID times where they're having like 10% capacity, we all have an app and we kind of compare to each other. Because if you think about performance, right? Performance inside your organization, you can plan for 10% more than we did last year, and that's fine. But what's important is context for your customers. Your customers have a choice, and you're better than you were last year only in the context of you're also better of all the other options. And so if you want to become a better organization, like you are trying to be a better athlete, you got to take that into the context of, okay, what are the other athletes that look like me, that have the same weight, the same aspirations? What are they doing? So I can match my performance and I know what's available, what's possible for me, right? So I think this is where we're just scratching the surface, and this theme of consumerization of analytics is happening obviously in our consumer world, but it will continue to happen inside the organization. I mean, today it's, very few employees get the information that they need at the moment where they need it to make decisions, and that has to change. That's really the only way we're going to create more effective organizations.
Absolutely. And let's talk about, kind of the folks who are looking for information. Something common that I hear with customers is, I had no idea that Google was doing XYZ in data and analytics, or that Google was this differentiated. If I'm a business, where do I look to kind of get some of my information about, the technology and purchasing decisions that I'm making?
So the first thing that I would say is, if you're an enterprise buyer, you've got to go check out research from Gartner and Forrester and Ventana and IDC. I would say don't start with the vendor's website. Even though I'm a vendor myself, I would tend to say, hey, we've got all the information you need. The reality is that broaden your view as much as you can, and try to get advice from these analyst firms who do a ton of work to make sure they see what's real and what's not. That's probably the first area I would go to. Second is try to belong in communities. It's very easy now to go into LinkedIn, or even if you're a technologist, to go into Quora and other technology like GitHub, communities like that, when you can start seeing what are people actually doing with the technology. And then third is, once you're part of a customer community, try and filter your information through customers. So for instance, at many of our events, every presentation we do about a product or a product area, we lead with the customers. And that's by design, because we have amazing technology and we're convinced of that, of course, and we know that's true, but we want you to see how the other customers are experiencing that. So go take a look at MLB's video, go take a look at Bluecore's video, go take a look at customer that looks like you, maybe in your industry, maybe in your geography, or maybe in your segment. Maybe if you're a large enterprise, you want to go take a look at those organizations. If you're a smaller company, go take a look at these small companies. Try to learn from these customers and reach out to them. You'll be surprised how willing members of the community are to take half hour and tell you what they did to succeed. So I would not be shy about this. Start with the research, find the customers, consume as much content as you can from these customers, and more importantly, reach out to them, because in the end, you want to be part of a community that you can identify to. I'll just give you one example, and I'm very passionate about those. So it's difficult to get me to stop talking about them, but every month we have the data analytics customer council meeting, which brings all these customers together and they talk about their success, their challenges, and so forth. And the reason for why we do it is not because we want to talk to them. Of course, we want to talk to them, but the primary reason is because we want them to connect with each other. We want to create a platform where they can learn from each other, because if we do that, we know we can build a vibrant community, and we know we can ultimately bring value to the market.
A lot of synergy with the benefits of open source and what goes along with our go-to-market. But I think that's a good transition. I don't think there's any better way to learn about technology than through customer stories. A big part of your role is connecting and understanding the customers of Google Cloud. From a data and analytics perspective, why are customers choosing Google Cloud?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because if you're a CIO or a chief data officer, they're really, the big challenge, we talked about this at the beginning, is I got all this data, and there's no question that data is growing and it's growing out of control and so forth. I mean, we don't have to put the stats for people to agree with that. It's undeniable. The issue is that now that I have all this data, I'm actually bringing value to my end users, and the vectors of value, if you will, go in three buckets, I would think. The first one is, of course, you want to return data values in a way where, I think about the story of Rick at the Home Depot, taking a traditional workload from an on-prem data warehouse to BigQuery, was able to bring that data and increase predictive accuracy by a factor of 2x. So that's what I'm talking when I'm talking about value, is how do I accelerate the go-to-market abilities of my company to do things better and more effectively? So returning value from data is a particular motivation. The second motivation is mitigate risk. So you take the example of Daryl at HSBC, and if you go online, you'll be able to see his presentation on stage. This is a company, HSBC, gosh, it's a traditional bank. It's, I think, the largest bank in Europe. It's got 30 years worth of data that they moved to the Google Cloud to be able to predict better. But in their case, they were able to detect financial crime 10 times faster. So you can imagine, if you're a customer or a client of HSBC, and I think they got 40 million customers across the world, how safe you're going to feel if you're one of their customers, because that bank has the infrastructure needed so they can detect when crime occurs. And I don't know who you bank with, but it always makes you feel good when one of your transactions is being flagged, you get a text and you're realizing, man, this bank is really on top of it. They have the data, they know where I am, and they're making sure that nobody's taking advantage of my own bank account. And then the third motivation is saving money. You think about, the example of Juan, the CIO at UPS. This is UPS is an organization everybody knows, particularly these days. They've got growing business. They're using machine learning across 1 billion data sets. This is a company that's combining data analytics solutions, able to save about $400 million a year. So, and reducing, I think, consumption of gas by 10 million gallons a year. So you think about, I'm using data in order to return immediate value so my people can be more productive. That's one. Two, I'm also making sure I'm securing the business of the folks I'm interacting with. And then three, I'm also more effective. And so now I'm able to identify areas where maybe we're on the wrong routes, or maybe we're doing things because we used to do them that way in the past. But now that we have the data, we're able to optimize and save money for the organization. So those are kind of the three themes in general that customers gravitate towards.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And one of the themes I hear a lot from customers is that Google is significantly simplifying big data and analytics, making it easier for our teams to get value, collect the data, do that efficiently, scale it, and then really analyze it to make better business decisions.
So if you think about, the best way, Ryan, that I could think about this, if you're not familiar with the Google data analytics options for you, I'll give you one image. If you think about the internet and you think about how complex the internet data is, right? It's constantly moving. It is being updated, and it's growing at a pace that is unmanageable. Well, how did we make that available to you? Through one simple search bar that any individual, a 5-year-old, can interact with and crawl that internet and find an answer that's relevant to them. So if we're able to simplify the complex, fast-moving, fast-growing world of data that's in the internet, imagine if we could do that for your organization, right? And so you got to believe that the assets that we use for Google's infrastructure, which are available now to you, you think BigQuery is technology that we have been using internally for over 10 years. If you think about data flow, this is technology that we've also using. It's powering a lot of our own work, right? So all these technologies that we use to simplify how you interact with the web, you can now take them in your own environment and simplify your complex data environment. So I think we do have a strategic advantage, and we do understand, the consumer of analytics, because they're coming to our site every day.
No, it's interesting, and I think it's a great comparison. Is what we're doing in this space is very similar to how Google simplified the internet.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I've been curious to get your take on is you've been with Google for what, 4 or 5 months at this point?
A little bit less, yeah. I think just over 2 months.
So from your perspective, I mean, you're coming over from Oracle. How is the market perceiving Google Cloud? What are some of the misconceptions, do you think, having joined so recently?
Yeah, I think the first, what do you call it? The first myth is that Google is typically for technical organizations, right? And it's merely for engineers and so forth. And I think that's a misconception at multiple levels. The first one is if you look at the types of organizations that use us, the applications they interact with are actually very business user friendly. Like for instance, Connected Sheets, right? Connected Sheets is basically, if you're familiar as an end user and you're using Google Sheets, Connected Sheets is a way to connect your sheets to BigQuery so you can analyze in live mode an unlimited amount of information at sub-second response time. So that's a great solution that actually doesn't really require a lot of engineering on your side, right? We make it really easy. We have a product called Data Q&A, which is basically a way to search through your data. Again, going back to the analogy of the Google search bar, if you will. Also very business user friendly. So I think the first misconception is if you look at how customers are using our products, they have this desire to use it for end users and consumers of data that we're actually very familiar with. That's probably misconception number one. Misconception number two is that people tend to think, oh yeah, it's the digital natives, right? It's the data natives that really favor Google and so forth. In fact, that's not true either. I mean, it's true that we have a lot of data native customers, but if you think about industries like retail, I think 8 out of the top 10 retailers, I think actually the actual data I think is 7 out of the top retail and CPG companies use Google. 8 out of the top 10 telco companies use us. 7 out of the top 10 media and entertainment companies use us. So we're present in all segments, and we certainly have industry solutions for just about any industry. So I think that's another misconception is people tend to think about, oh, you've got to be engineering led and building solutions for engineers, or you've got to be a company that is cross industry. That's not true. We do those things, but we also have a pretty good leadership anywhere you look at across the segments and across the industries.
No, I love that. And I think, a great way to think about it is we're helping our customers create, the same experience that they receive when they're using a product from Google. And, we're helping them create software the way Google does. And Google is known for great user experience. I mean, we have 9 applications with over 1 billion users. And there's not a lot of companies out there with that kind of experience.
That's right. I think, both the combination of our familiarity with your problem, because we have had to build and use our own technology to solve problems that now you're having, I think makes us, have better empathy with the problems you're trying to solve, because we tell you what we've done, essentially. There's also a second aspect that we haven't talked about here is our commitment to the open source community, right? If you think about where your engineering workforce is looking for ideas and innovation, it's open source, right? And so if you think about, BigQuery, for instance, BigQuery is an externalized version of the internal Dremel technology, which was heavily involved with Apache Drill and Impala, right? So, and you think about the connection between Dataflow and Apache Beam and so forth. So not only do we have empathy with the problem you're trying to experience, because we've experienced it ourselves, we also understand that the solution to your problem is probably broader than the commercial solution that we can bring to you. And that's why we continue to innovate in open source, and we continue to contribute into open source, because we realize you're going to have to build a lot of the solutions for your company, because ultimately that's what is going to make you unique in your industry. So I think having a good understanding of that, and it's really truly unique at Google, it's really is an unbeatable, I think, solution for customers.
And you spoke to some of the integration, which I think is a huge advantage, the product integration. I think that's a good segue. What are some of the other competitive advantages you're seeing that Google has when it comes to data and analytics?
Well, so I think the first advantage I can think of, and we touched on it a little bit at the beginning here, is the breadth across the various types of users you're going to get. If naturally you're going to think Google is really strong if it comes to my data scientists and my data engineers, and that's true. I think what I would invite you to do is take a look at the assets we have around the information workers, and we talked about connected sheets and data Q&A and so forth, as well as the data analysts themselves. You might have heard of the recent acquisition of Looker, which is one of the best and most modern BI platforms in the market. So I think one is the breadth where we can be helpful to your organization as you're building your stack. Second is how open the platform is. And we talked about open source here, but I also talk about the multi-cloud strategy that we have. I mean, if you think about the other vendors that we work with, Google is really in a unique position to provide you with a solution that helps you today, but also a solution that helps you with your tomorrow, because we have built solutions that enable you to have data across multiple clouds. And we've embraced that. So Anthos is an example for application modernization, and BigQuery Omni is another example for data management and data analytics. So if your audience doesn't know, BigQuery Omni is a way for you to analyze data that might be stored in AWS and then soon stored in Azure, so we can bring the compute to where the data is. Because one of the issues in this world is because data is everywhere and you're trying to analyze it somewhere, most people, what they do is they move the data, multiple copies of the data, they create extracts, which are really not efficient because it's not very secure, it's slow, the data is not live, it's out of date very quickly, and so forth. So we're thinking about these problems on how can we help you build a solution that is broad for your end users, that is broad for where your data is at, so we can bring you the compute to where your data is at. Those are really unique approaches to the market that I think ultimately will serve customers better as they compare us to the other clouds.
Are there any products in particular for you that you think the community should be more aware of? I know that BigQuery has gotten a lot more popular with our customers.
I love all my products the same way, I would say. I'm a big fan of PubSub and BigQuery and Data Prep and Data Studio and Composer and Looker, and I'm going to rattle them off here. But one I would say could be interesting for CIOs and CDOs that people might not think about as much because it might not sound sexy, is data catalog. So here's a fact, right? Within 3 seconds of your data hitting BigQuery, we start profiling, if you will, your data so it can help you analyze it better. And that's really important if you're a chief data officer or a CIO, is being able to know the metadata about my data so I can then organize myself around it. And we have a really unique offer there with Data Catalog that, I think, we don't talk a lot about, but that certainly if you are building an analytics system that is both real-time, it's complex because you got a lot of different data sources and it's broad, you're going to want to take a look at Data Catalog.
No, thanks for sharing. So last question I have for you, Google related, is, tell us more about how, we're going to be approaching product management, and where will we see Google continue to accelerate and improve?
So there are a few areas, and we're doing already a lot there, but there's a few areas, if you're listening to this, where you'll see us more of. I think I talked about the data analytics customer council, or we used to do that on a yearly basis. And now that I've been on board, Chad Jennings, who's on the team and runs this project, is going to do it every month. So if you're in the ecosystem, right, if you're using any of these 12 products that I talked about earlier, you're going to want to reach out to Chad and I to make sure you're electing yourself into the customer council. We want to make sure that everything we build is based on what it is that you need. And so you don't need to be one of our largest customers. You need to just reach out to us and make sure that you contribute, and then you're able to be part of the community. That's one. Second is on partners. So we've got a growing and huge partner ecosystem where we want to hear from you as well. So we are going to build the partner advisory councils as well, so we can bring you into co-creating innovative product roadmaps for us, because we realize that consumers of analytics need products that are the whole products. And so this is a concept we call beyond the bits, where basically, having great products that we build and build upon every 30 days and bring more innovations to you, that's the starting point. But we also want to make sure that we have partners that can assist you in order to build the solutions that you need. And we already have a very large partner ecosystem. We just want to make sure that they're coming in and kind of guiding our roadmap. And then the third item that you should take a look at is this area we call design patterns. So design patterns are solutions that get you started on a particular problem. So I'll give you an example: anomaly detection, fraud detection, product recommendation, and so forth. Those are problems you're trying to solve, and maybe today you haven't thought through how am I going to build that solution end to end. We've created now blueprints, technical guidance, sample code, and sample data so you can get started. So instead of starting at the 10% mark, you're going to start at 70% mark so you can get to your results faster. The way we've elaborated those design patterns is by looking across all our customers and determining which are the biggest problems they're trying to solve and try to kind of help them get there faster. So I would say, if you're a customer, join our community. If you're a partner, join our community. And if you're a customer today that is trying to solve, very specific problems, take a look at our design patterns because they'll help you get there faster.
No, that's amazing. So turning the conversation now a bit more personal and a few questions to round us out.
Okay.
A question that we ask pretty regularly on the show is where have you failed as a tech leader, and what did you learn from the experience?
So I have failed many times, I think, and so it'd be too long of a show, I think, to tell you. But I think probably the place of failure is waiting too long to get started. I think if I were to do it again, I would move to the US right after I graduated from college. And what I did instead is I went to work for this great company. It's a company called Decathlon, which is in the retail space. And it's kind of, think about it like the Nike of France. And I learned a ton there from a management standpoint and management methodology. But I did it because I didn't think I was ready to move to the Silicon Valley. There we deployed SAP systems and CRM systems and so forth. So definitely, had the technical, teachings, if you will, on how to deploy applications in an environment that's a fairly large distributed organization. But I would say if you're interested in the space today and you're just coming out of college, you're never going to know when you're ready. So you might as well not wait. Just go for it. Because I'm sure that you'll be doing fine. What it takes is, I always tell people, you've been given the choice to work harder or work smarter, and you got to do both. You got to work harder and smarter, and you got to do it earlier.
I love that. I mean, there's no shortcuts. It's working hard. It's working smart. And I think people, overestimate maybe what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. And it goes by so quickly.
Right. That is very true.
Any other advice looking back at your young self that you give yourself knowing what you know now, or what would you tell, young tech employees just getting started?
Yeah, I would say, this is the first one I would say is don't hesitate to jump in, and also don't hesitate to ask questions. Often I think, especially when you join a new company or a new industry, or you're kind of afraid of asking questions. And then one of my books here behind me, you can't see him, is work by Brene Brown. I don't know if you know Brene Brown, but she's a great speaker, and she's a student of being vulnerable. And I would say, certainly at Google, this is something we encourage is having this, if you will, this ability to say, hey, I don't know, or I need to understand more, and so forth. And I think more and more organizations are doing that. Certainly, the startups that I did, it was easier to be vulnerable because typically when you do a startup, I was number 7 at one of them. You're trusting the people around you. And so it's easy to say when you don't know. But I'd say increasingly organizations that want to succeed are creating that, psychological safety, if that's a term, where people can be vulnerable and say, I don't know. So I would say just be more confident about yourself and trust the people around you so you can learn faster.
There's a quote that I love that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And when you have that safety, it just encourages that collaboration. I heard a story about Pixar and how, before every movie was created, about halfway through the creative process, they would screen the movie. And it wasn't anywhere near to being completed, but they would get everybody in the company's feedback. And then they'd have a session, for a couple hours where people would just say, I didn't like this. I didn't like this. Why? Just kind of challenge a lot of the creative team.
Yeah.
And then they would take that information, they would put it back into the movie. And, it's just so different from how most companies are creating movies or products to really, make that feedback part of the collaboration process.
That's super interesting. One of the things that we're doing in my team, and it's technique that I've used for a couple of jobs, is what we call the pre-mortem. So before you have a launch, or before you have something critical that is required to make sure you win, we sit down and we imagine everything that could go wrong. And based on that, when we either make changes right now or we make plans to make sure that when they occur, we're ahead of them. The worst thing that you could do to yourself is reacting. Now, you're going to react better because you're better prepared. But there are many issues you could probably anticipate and think about it. And so most people, that's negative. They think, okay, that's negative outlook on reality. And one of my favorite authors is the author of a book called Principle. I don't know if you know Ray Dalio. And Ray Dalio says, you have to be a realist. And I would encourage people to do that. Don't be shy to be an extreme realist, so you know what the reality is, so you can plan for it when it hits you. And that's how to be successful, I think.
Yeah, and Ray Dalio, the most successful hedge fund run, with Bridgeport Capital of all time. That book, highly recommended. He also has a YouTube video series that's 30 minutes that goes over the entire book. That's pretty awesome.
He had a few failures himself, and he talks about that in there as well.
Absolutely. So tell me, who do you look up to in the tech community and why?
Well, there's quite a few people I look up to. So, I'll go back to Ray Dalio, actually. I'll just pick him as an example and why I like the way he thinks about his business. The first reason for why I like Ray Dalio is what we just talked about, is this idea of having principles that guide how you make decisions. And I love that. And I love the fact that he has it. I also love the fact that he actually wrote it for his employees and made that available to the rest of us. And so I like that a lot. What I like about him as well is that he actually, if you read his work, he has put into place a software system to keep track of decision making. And so, one of my big passions and the reason for why I'm in the space of data analytics is because ultimately I'm passionate about what is the psychology, how people make decisions ultimately, because the software we have, can assist them to do that. And he's built a system that is based on idea of meritocracy, which is an important concept for many of us. In France, we say, everyone has an opinion, and that's true, but it doesn't mean that everyone's opinion actually should change the course of things. You can bring that as an input, but you also have to rank the opinions based on, well, is this person qualified for this problem? What has been the history of their opinion as it came down to the decision? And so he's really done a really great job, I think, codifying what decision making looks like in a successful environment. And so he's definitely one of the folks I look up to in the, I guess you could call it the tech industry. He's really in the financial industry, but these days it's kind of difficult to tell the difference. Financial organizations are also tech organizations. So he'd be one for sure.
I think every organization is becoming a tech company at this point. And what I love about that book is he talks about, Ray talks about in the 80s, he had built a multi-million-dollar successful business and lost everything. And he says, I think this really speaks to data analytics. He says, at that point, in my life, I changed from going, I know, and really looking at it through the lens of, well, how do I know? And bringing in kind of that humility. And I think, that's where data and analytics shine is, can we find, some benchmarks and some data that backs up, the reason why I believe a certain way.
I'm biased, of course, because this is my passion as well as what I do on a daily basis. But I do think that, data analytics is at the core of just about everything that we do. I mean, there's a great quote I like to use, which is, we're not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. So basically, there's a big part where you can have all the technology you want, you can have the best software and so forth. But if that software is not used in the context of how people make decisions emotionally, you are going to naturally gravitate towards making the wrong decisions. And so there's a lot of psychology involved in decision making. And as software vendors, we have to take that into account. If I'm giving you a data point out of nowhere and it's not in your workflow, how are you going to act on it differently than if it was in a different point in your day? So that's where I think it's going next, and I think that's where it's interesting. Going back to the data you get on your phone or the data you get on your watch. If I were to tell you right when you're about to finish your run that if you ran another 3 minutes, you'd break an all-time personal record, you probably would do it. If I told you that 5 minutes after you run, well, it's too late. And so being able to understand that, what makes people make the right decisions, ultimately when we solve that, I think we can retire. But there's a long way to go before we get there.
Completely. And I think that's what makes Google so unique, is that we're really helping change the complete culture and making companies data-driven cultures and democratizing data so that people can start to use it as part of their daily process. Henry Schuck, who's the CEO of ZoomInfo, who both you and I know, he talked about how early, the early days of his company, they would constantly be tweaking things based on the data. And he said, human nature, when we started doing that, we would say, oh, I'm sorry that we just changed this thing that we had changed previously, and now we're changing it again. And eventually, after a couple of years, they realized this is just who we are. We want to be a data-driven organization, and we're going to implement something. And if we find out there's a better way to do it, we're going to do it that way. And from there on, they've been one of the largest tech IPOs in recent history. And you've kind of seen the success, and I think that was fundamental to that success.
I talked to Henry recently, and I talked to his tech team as well. And I was a customer of ZoomInfo in one of my startups, and I didn't realize the complexity of their tech environment. It really is quite amazing. I can't remember the number of data sources he told me he's using, but you're right that it needs an agile way of thinking about how you're using data to serve the end users with the right solutions. And thank God that today we have technology that can move with you, right? I mean, you go 10 years ago, making the changes he talks about, would require rip and replace, and 2 years worth of re-architecting your environment. Now with serverless and APIs and service-oriented applications like what we've been able to build, you can really change on a dime, which I think is what organizations, traditional enterprise organizations, they need help with. And certainly we're here for that.
So last few, what's something folks might not know about you outside of work?
Well, there are a few, when you join Google, they ask you to send this email about, I think it's truth and a lie. So what I sent, I think, so I said this in the opening, I said, I'm French. I think the email that I sent is I have 0% DNA, French DNA in my blood. I played with the LA Galaxy, and in the third one, I can't remember right now. And so one thing you might not know about me is, even though I am very French, I was born in France, it's my native language, I love the food, the culture, the people, my entire family is still in France. I actually have 0% French DNA in my body. My mother-in-law bought me a test a few years ago, and I took a DNA test, and it turns out I think I have 30% Italian, which makes sense because my grandparents Sicily, and on one side, on the other side, they're from Israel. So it's natural that I would not be 100% French, but I still thought that I'd have a little bit of it in me, and I don't at all. So next time you meet me, definitely talk to me about French food. But you're probably more French than I am, Ryan. You probably have more French percentages in you than I do.
I don't think so. I'm Mexican. Maybe.
Well, who knows? There's a lot of French people in Mexico early on.
Oh, is that right? So, Bruno, I want to thank you again for being a guest of the show. If I'd like to learn more about you or your team's work, where should I get started?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, the easier way to find me is go on LinkedIn. Every Monday, I do a quick update that I call the top 5 data, AI, and analytics posts of the week. As we discussed, it's my passion, so I follow the industry, and I try to update the community on what they might have missed throughout the week. So best way to get a hold of me is find me on LinkedIn, send me an invite, talk to me about something that's interesting to you, and then hopefully we can build a bigger and better community together.
Amazing. Thanks again, Bruno.